Good morning and welcome everyone to our Fairwork launch. A very warm welcome to those of you that are joining us today. My name is Pitso Tsibolane. I'm the Senior Lecturer at the Department of Information Systems here at the University of Cape Town. I am the Principal Investigator for the Fairwork project for 2022. Today we're launching the 4th annual Fairworks course for South Africa. So what's Fairwork in a nutshell? Fairwork is a multinational action research project that shines the spotlight on the working conditions in the platform economy. We evaluate and rank the working conditions of digital platforms based on a set of principles that digital labor platforms should maintain in order to be considered to be offering basic minimum standards of fairness. The Fairwork ratings provide an independent perspective on labor conditions of platform work for policymakers, for platform companies, for workers, as well as the consumers. Our goal is to show that better and fairer jobs are possible in the platform economy. Today, to present the research that we've conducted over the last year, we have two members of the team with me on the stage. This is Dr. Sharon Geeling, as well as Dr. Murali Shanmugavelan. Sharon is a postdoctoral research fellow in the Department of Information Systems of the University of Cape Town. She led the data collection for the 2022 report. Her research interest is in social phenomena and information systems, particularly cultural influences and ethical dilemmas raised by the use of technologies in society. Dr. Murali is a postdoctoral researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute, who is also heavily involved with the Fairwork Central team in various leadership capacities. His scholarly research focuses on the remanifestation of social hierarchies such as caste, race, and gender groups in digital cultures such as hate speech, big data, and platform economies. He will talk to us about the Fairwork research design and the principles. We are also very honored to be joined by Professor Ines Meyer, who will respond to the report findings, as well as Professor Jean-Paul van Belle, who will also offer some comments. Now, Dr. Murali will introduce them later on before they speak. Now, before we get started, the Fairwork project is based at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom and the WZB Berlin Social Science Center in Germany. Through a global network of researchers based in more than 30 countries across 5 continents, we collaborate closely with workers, platforms, advocates, and policymakers to envision and build a fairer future of work. This year, we evaluated 13 platforms in the ride-hailing, food delivery, courier, and domestic services sectors against the 5 principles of Fairwork, and given them a score out of 10 based on the quality of work that they provide. Now, before we get into it, just a little bit of housekeeping for those that are joining us online. We're fortunate to have a wide and varied audience with a wide range of views, and so may we please request that everyone's opinions and perspectives be respected in this space. And also for your awareness, this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website following this event. Now, you can pose any questions using the Q&A tab on the Zoom platform at any time. These questions will then be answered towards the end of the talk. So please keep your questions as concise as possible, and questions will be visible to all the attendees. So be mindful of what you type in there, and they can be upvoted and commented upon by others. And we will endeavor to follow up with any of the unanswered questions that we don't get to before this session ends. Let me now hand over to my colleague, Dr. Murali, who will talk to us through the research, and also followed by Sharon, who will talk to us through the results. And Dr. Murali will hand over to Sharon, who will talk us through those findings when he's done. So I'm handing over to you, my colleagues.
Thank you, Pitso, if I may, for setting the context so thoroughly and very clearly. And good morning to everybody for joining us early this morning, depending on which time zone, wherever you are. My colleague Pitso explained the general values behind this Fairwork, how they are put together. Now, what I will be doing in the next few minutes, how these values actually shape our principles, research design, and method, so that it will give an idea to participants here that how we arrived at these numbers that score what we call, because each platform is scored out of 10. So you'll get an idea how we came about. So there are 5 Fairwork principles behind our work. And these are the basic tenets of work that must be fulfilled for platform work to be categorized. And these principles have been developed. This is very important, which Pitso actually did mention that he said action research. So these principles, we have arrived at these principles after in conversation and discussions with workers during sessions at the International Labour Organization. So it is not something that discussed in private with them, so some sort of a self-reflective thinking, but it involves very consultative, elaborate discussions and debates and dialogues with workers. That's something that we'd like to emphasize. So as you can see on the slide, there are 5 major principles. I'll go through each one very briefly. The first one is fair pay. And this is a very clear and starting of any workers paid on basic decent worker conditions that ensures workers' conditions. So here we focus that we can only give the platform a point if workers earn a decent living income, a minimum wage and living wage after taking account of work-related costs. So these work-related costs may vary from one platform to the other platform, nature of work. So if the platform demands, most platforms actually demand data expenses, so that may need to be taken into account. So we go through what are the relevant costs that are involved that need to be actually taken as a work-related expenses, and then the platform should ensure a decent wage, minimum wage, and living wage. The second one is fair conditions. Platforms should have policies in place to protect workers from 2 types of risks. One is a general risk that's associated with platforms. For example, if a particular platform worker actually tends to carry liquid cash on hand, what are the protections actually extended to these workers, because he might or she might be burgled. So that's sort of a very specific task-specific risks, but also general risks about in terms of platform's data management and what sort of protection that platform owners are extending to ensure that the workers actually have very fair conditions to perform their tasks. And the third one is fair contract. And here terms and conditions should be very transparent, concise, and always accessible to workers. And it should be subjected to local legal jurisdiction, liability, and it should be, imposing unfair contract terms. And the fourth one is fair management. Here's what's really specific is that there should be a documented process. We emphasize on that because we don't want to leave this particular principle to the whims of best practices or best practices methods. We want it to be a documented due process so that workers can know that they are entitled to this fair process of decisions, appealing processes and so on, so that they are not discriminated against any particular practices or social categories, and protected categories, and so on and so forth. And the fifth principle is fair representation. Here we emphasize that platforms should provide, again, a documented process through which worker voices can be expressed, the right to form collective bodies. In a sense, we want to make sure that there is an opportunity, a recognized and acknowledged opportunity by the platform management through which the workers can actually form a collective entity, and then they can represent themselves and constantly engage with the practices of management that affects workers' living conditions. So here, once again, the emphasis on a documented process. So the next point I'd like to go is that, which will be the next slide, the scoring system. So as you can see that these 5 principles are actually divided into or broken into 2 points. One is the first point is actually what we call a basic point. It's a basic condition that needs to be met. And then there is an advanced point. So for any platform to receive an advanced point, the basic condition must have been met. For example, in fair pay, the minimum wage is the basic point, and then the second advanced point is the living wage. So the assumption here is that they cannot actually, the workers may not be able to have a assured living wage according to the local national statistics and so on, if they didn't have a national minimum wage. So that's the sort of a relational point. So each principle, therefore, is broken into 2 points. And as a result, they are awarded totally 10 points. So you can see that each section has 2 points. And yeah, so every platform, in a sense, ideally can receive up to a score 10 out of 10 if they're really performing well. And platforms are only given a point when they can successfully demonstrate their implementation of the principles. And this point requires a little bit of elaboration. Satisfactorily demonstrate, not successfully, sorry about that. Satisfactorily demonstrate their implementation. But this again requires documented policy and evidence, and also workers' interview. That takes us to the next way of how these scores are calculated. So what we do here is that we have 3 types of data collection that's happening. So the first one is desk research. So the process starts with a sort of a literature review or research to ascertain which platforms are operating in each city, or sometimes we could be able to do the same platform in 2 different cities, depending on the size and importance of the influence of their particular platform in a particular national context, as well as their influential in general terms. So that kind of actually leads us to, map the largest and most influential platform, and that kind of informs us to study which platform are we going to study. The next one is that once we've got the desktop research is done, we will look at their policies, we will look at what they are claiming about themselves, how they are operating. So pretty much each platform has something to say about that, how they treat workers, how much they pay, and so on and so forth. So we kind of collect those information, basic, valuable information that is available in public domain. And then we go to workers to interview them. Typically, we interview 6 to 10 workers per platform. This is a very qualitative interview, and we try to actually get insights from each worker, their experiences, and how platforms' policies affect their working conditions. So this is not so much about presenting a huge volume of data rush. No, this is more a qualitative understanding of insights to workers' living conditions. So this allows us to understand the process of work and ways it's carried out and managed. So once we interview platform managers, once we interview workers, we then actually take this, collate this information and see what are the emerging trends and analysis, and see the conformities and differences between desktop research and workers' interviews, and then later take these findings to platform managers. There we interview managers and request evidence for each of the Fairwork principles where we are not satisfied, especially, and we demand those evidences. And this provides a kind of insights and kind of actually, solidifies what we are how we are trying to score. So how do we put all together? So final scores are collectively decided by the Fairwork team. So this is very important. So based on all these 3 importance, we get a sort of overwhelming evidence. Okay, we can award a particular point to a particular principle for this platform, A, B, C, D, or E, and each principle as well. So that's decided by Fairwork team based on all 3 forms of evidence. And these scores are peer reviewed by the country team, in this case, Pitso, Sharon, and Jean-Paul, JP, and many others, Richard Hicks. and the Oxford team, colleagues from the Oxford, and also 2 reviewers from the Fairwork country team. So it's a very strong process that going to sort of validating these scores. So any differences in this process are discussed, consulted, and then if necessary, the research teams will go back to the platform managers or look for further evidences to ensure that these scores are awarded correctly. So this provides sort of a consistency and rigor to the scoring process. And this is how every Fairwork country reports platforms are scored, and you will see how that's actually reflected in South Africa's report as well. So that's a sort of, in a nutshell, how we actually arrive, what our research design is all about. Now, may I invite Sharon to present the findings of the South Africa report, please. Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you, Murali.
It's an echo, Sharon. You might
Is it terrible? Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So before I go into the detail of the findings, I just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the participants in this research. So the many platform workers that we spoke to who were willing to share their personal experiences about platform work, and to the platform companies who shared their platform policies, procedures, and practices with us. We really do need this information. We can't do this research without it. So on behalf of the whole Fairwork team, a big thank you to all of you for this support. So this is the 4th year of charting the platform economy in South Africa. And in previous years, the ratings show that platform workers, as in so many countries worldwide, continue to face unfair work conditions and lack the benefits and protections afforded to employees. The lifting of the national state of disaster in South Africa in April meant a readjustment in working conditions. So these adjustments must be made under really challenging economic pressures. We see inflation in South Africa is at its highest levels since May 2009. And at the price of fuel is at levels never seen before in this country. Most workers we interviewed reported fuel and transportation costs as the biggest contributor to their work-related expenses, regardless of the sector in which they operate. 2022 also saw the introduction for us of updated Fair Work principles for fair conditions, fair management, and fair representation. As a result, and in contrast to previous years, no platform was awarded a 2nd point for fair conditions or fair representation this year. The next slide, please. So in 2022, we included 13 of the largest digital labor platforms in South Africa, and we scored them against the 5 principles as they've been described. Overall, the scores this year are lower in comparison to previous years, and we attribute this to the economic situation and to the changes in the Fair Work principles. So SweepSouth leads the 2022 table with 7 points, while getTOD, Money for Jam, and Mr. Delivery are tied in 2nd place with 6 out of 10 points. There were 3 platforms this year where we were unable to find sufficient evidence to award any points. So the score for these platforms is a 0. SweepSouth is also our platform in focus this year because not only do they lead the rankings for the first time, but the workers we interviewed stood out as well organized and motivated. They used platform-provided communication channels to support and mentor each other. And in general, the sweep stars, as they are called, are loyal to the platform, happy with SweepSouth, and grateful for the work opportunities the platform provides them. So moving on. This slide essentially summarizes the scoring. So if you're interested in the details, please do consult the website or the report. So first of all, I'm going to look at each of the Fair Work principles in turn, starting with fair pay. So Murali mentioned when we assess the workers' pay, we take into account not only the amount that is paid by the platform for the hours that are worked, but also the cost to the workers of covering their work-related expenses and the waiting time between jobs. So on this basis, 6 platforms can evidence that workers' pay is at or above the national minimum wage, which in 2022 is 23.19 Rand an hour. When assessing the workers' pay against the living wage, currently 43 Rand an hour for Fair Work in South Africa, only 4 of the platforms could be awarded a point. We also see, as in previous years, that to cover their expenses, many workers have to exceed the 45 hours per 7 days permitted in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act in South Africa. So for fair conditions, 7 platforms were awarded a point for the actions they take to protect the workers from risks that arise on the job. So this could be through training or through providing affordable insurance for the workers. And these platforms also meet the new requirement this year of a documented data protection and management policy. However, no platform could satisfy the new requirement for measures to compensate workers for loss of income through illness, nor have we seen any evidence of documented processes describing the steps the platform takes if workers are not able to work for an extended period due to some unforeseen circumstances. Then for fair contracts, we see 6 platforms can show a basic level of fairness in their contracts with clear and accessible terms and conditions. And of these 6, 3 can show that they don't unreasonably exclude platform liability and that the contract doesn't contain clauses that prevent workers from seeking redress for grievances. For fair management, we have 7 platforms that can demonstrate their workers have avenues available to meaningfully appeal decisions that affect them without facing any negative consequences. 3 of these platforms can also show how they support equality, diversity, and inclusion in their workforce, and also transparency in algorithms that determine access to work or to remuneration. Then finally, for fair representation, in the South African platform economy, much more is needed to enable workers to freely organize under recognized collective bodies. So 3 platforms have documented mechanisms that assure workers have freedom of association and freedom to express their collective voice. But no platforms meet the new requirement this year to show how workers have a say in their working conditions. Thank you. So finally, I just want to present some key themes. Next slide, please. So finally, I just want to present some key themes that came out of our research this year. So first of all, we see the strong theme of rising costs. So here it's high inflation, high fuel and transportation costs, and these affect platform workers more than workers classified as employees. So as independent contractors, platform workers must cover all their work-related costs themselves. Now in South Africa, the transport sector has seen the highest price acceleration And most of the workers we interviewed this year across the different sectors reported the price of fuel or transportation as the biggest contributor to their costs. Also, although more than half of the platforms failed to meet the national minimum wage after costs, most of the workers we interviewed haven't seen an increase to base rates during their time on the platform. Also, alarmingly for us, for the first time since Fairwork South Africa work began in 2019, a handful of workers across several platforms gave us estimates that show their hourly costs are now exceeding their hourly pay. Almost half the workers we interviewed raised safety again as their main challenge doing platform work. So safety has been on the radar since the beginning of our Fair Work work. But platform workers are finding it increasingly difficult to make ends meet. So this puts additional pressure on them to accept high-risk work, like venturing into crime-ridden areas or for women working after dark. So in this context of rising costs, platform workers have found ways to make ends meet. So some workers resort to working outside the app. So here we see a platform's client details are obtained in some way, like perhaps through a screenshot, and then the worker contacts the client directly with better pricing options. Also, about half the workers we interviewed work on more than one platform, usually a competitor. So several of them report a strategy of checking pricing commission across platforms and switching to an alternative if the options look better. So that really is a sort of high-level summary of our findings this year. Of course, the details are available on our website and in the Fair Work report. So if you're interested in those, please do have a look. Otherwise, that's my session for now, and I'm handing over to Pitso.
Right, thank you, Sharon, for sharing all those interesting observations and the research results that we gathered so far. Now, as Sharon said, the report is available. It's quite detailed and it's available on our website. So if you just go there, fair.org/SA, you will be able to find the report there. Well, before we hand over to Prof Ines and Prof JP to give us a response, I would just want to do a call. You might have heard that about how different platform companies are choosing to either integrate or ignore the basic standards of fairness in how they manage their workforces. Some choose to ensure that workers can't earn below the minimum wage. Some don't. Some choose to ensure that workers have the right to due process. Some don't. The fact that scores are across the board so low shows that this is an outcome of a market largely left to itself. A few companies are choosing fair outcomes for their workers, but most won't do so unless there's some regulation in place. That said, some of us may be wondering what we can do. What can we do? There's a way that each one of us can help. We have developed a pledge that is open to organizations, be they businesses, charities, universities, religious institutions, investors, governments, and so forth. It's a pledge for all of those organizations to do more, to pay attention to the working conditions of platform workers. We're asking them to pay attention to their relative scores, of different platforms when they, their staff, their members use these platforms. And so that we can all lead by examples, and we can demand more from those platforms, particularly those platforms with scores that are very low. You can find the pledge on our website, and if you'd like to learn more about it, if you just go to our fair.org website, you will find links there around the pledge. So we are calling on to all companies to be supporters and be part of this change that we want to see. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Murali, who is going to introduce to us our guests who are going to give us a response. to the report. I hand over to you.
So, okay, we have two very impressive panelists, and also we do have.
Murali, I think you are muted.
Oh, no, I'm not muted. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So we have two very impressive panelists, and also I strongly urge other authors, fellow authors, Pitso and Sharon, to join if they find there's a need for them to actually add any more comments. But let me introduce Ines Meyer. So I'm sorry, I'm going to read from the paper because I've got a very impressive bio here. It's very difficult for me to memorize all this. So Ines, if I may, is a professor in organizational psychology at the University of Cape Town. Before starting her academic career, she worked in industry and with community-based organizations in South Africa. And then she later shaped her academic focus. And she currently holds the National Research Foundation South African Research Chair, Initiative Chair in creation of decent work and sustainable livelihood, through which she advocates the question about what the economy needs becomes secondary to what humans need. Now, I'd like to stop there because that actually gives me the entry point to set the context and then ask a question to Ines. JP, I'll come to you in a bit later, introduce a little bit later, but first to Ines, that if I may. Ines, you've heard Sharon's presentation about this year's key themes, and in which she mentioned about raising costs, safety, and how workers are finding it's difficult to make the ends meet. And these seem to be the trend. So given your experience in South Africa, how could you just talk through the idea of work and sustainable livelihood? What it does mean and to South African workers, especially to the platform worker, and how can we actually understand some of these challenges experienced by platform workers, and what do you think that needs to happen, not just by platform, but also by government regulatory mechanism and by any other civil society organization. So what do you think that needs to happen? Your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Murali. Thank you, Murali, and thank you to the Fairwork team overall for inviting me to this presentation. You're asking a big question. I think if I had the answer to that, I would have solved the world's problems and we wouldn't be where we are. So the question about what would make for sustainable livelihoods, but it is not a practical solution that I'm going to give as my answer, but I think it's a good starting point to think about it. And that is, what is it that we need in order to have a safer, more equal, less violent South Africa? And I think at the core, it comes down to affording everyone who is in the country dignity, because dignity is really what has been stripped of people for centuries and for many generations. And what comes with that is a loss of pride, a loss of self-belief, and therefore a lot of negative things are being perpetrated because people have been stripped of their dignity. And now work and working conditions and the way we engage with people at work is one way in which we can either make this worse, so take people's dignity away, for example, by affording them so little income that it is impossible to live a humble life. It is maybe just possible to survive, but that takes dignity away. Or in the way that we treat people, income is one of them, but the other 4 dimensions in the Fairwork report contribute to it too. If those are adhered to, we afford people with dignity. Now, if as employers, platform hosts, as well as employers and traditional organizations, we can contribute towards that. It would go a long way to affording people dignity and to making the country itself a better place. But from what you said, what can we do as individuals, as employers, as civil society organizations? I mean, it's a very complex topic. So there's not one thing that one can do. But I think a good starting point is to remind ourselves, what does it mean about, what am I saying to another person through treating them in a particular way? And treating can be, what are the kind of terms and conditions that come with employment? How do I interact on an interpersonal level with an employee? What do I say through the amount of money that I give to a person about how much do I value this person?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very succinct clarification. I understand it's a big question to answer. You're right. I mean, it's not very difficult to, it's not very easy to answer right away, offer the solution. We have Jean-Paul van Belle. He's a co-principal investigator for Fairwork in South Africa and the principal investigator on the related Fairwork 4 Weeks project. He's also a professor in the Department of Information Systems at the University of Cape Town and director of the Center for IT and National Development in Africa. JP, you have been part of this project as well. So my question to you is that what I came across when I was reading the report, discussing with you, one of the questions that I was quite interested to know that there is a common perception any regulations or any sort of rules might actually reduce job opportunities. There's a kind of a long historical thinking that you have to basically have a very liberal model in South Africa. Otherwise, any sort of a regulation or sort of a working condition improvement might actually cause problems to the labor's working condition. This is sort of a very interesting point to me. And I'm just thinking, in light of that and this particular key themes that Sharon actually mentioned, and you were part of it as well, what does the future hold for Fairwork gig economy in South Africa? And where do you think that we go from here? I know this is again a large question, but I want your kind of reflective thoughts on that. How do we actually maneuver to get to at least begin to think about ensuring fair and decent work for platform workers in South Africa, please?
Thank you, Murali, and welcome to everybody who's sitting on the other side of my screen here that I can't see. We promise next year, when we have the 5th year of review, we will we give you a proper drink and cup of coffee and maybe a snack to eat. So, but for now, I think pour yourselves a nice drink. And it's been great. It's been, your question is impossible to answer because we've had such an amazing ride in the last 4 or 5 years with this Fairwork project. So when we started out 4 years ago as one of the founding members, we had no clue where we're going to end up here now with more than 30 countries joining us and the pledge taking forward and companies getting on board, platforms changing their, I mean, we'd hoped for that, but I mean, it's gone way beyond our dreams. So looking forward where this is going to go further, I have no idea. But I like your question because I think maybe people on the outside believe that the Fairwork project is sort of like socialist, communist, and we definitely pro-workers, of course, because we believe that the workers in a more liberal economy, they're often being squeezed in terms of the value chain, and we want to make sure that everybody in the value chain, everybody who contributes value gets a fair share, and obviously defining that fair share. But the share should reflect the value added and the risk that has been taken on by the respective parties in the contract. And so I want to stress that we have a mixture. I mean, I come from a liberal economist background, other team members as well. So we're not all socialists or labor unionists in the Fairwork project, and we have these hearty debates internally as well. And I want to stress very strongly that we believe in innovation, in looking at new ways of working, and we believe in the platform that they play a key role to enabling, to creating jobs and so on. And so if a lot of people think that the adhering to the Fair Work principles is going to cost the platform economists some money. Well, some do, and I think where it does, like in giving a fair wage, there I think definitely. But the platform should not take the full consequence of that one. I think the customer or the consumer should also take responsibility for making sure that they pay a fair rate to the platform that then translates into a fair contribution to the worker. But obviously then the consumer's got the responsibility to actually look at which platforms reward and give a fair share of that payment to the workers. So we want to go further than just getting the pledges from companies. We want to actually activate the consumers and sensitize consumers to which platforms reward the workers and give them a fair share in terms of contribution. But more importantly, I also want to say that a lot of the Fair Work principles that we strive for do not cost the platform extra money. They're not costing profits. In fact, things like a readable contract or the ownership of personal data, or even like transparent management processes. These are just ways of doing good business, and in fact they make your workforce better and happier, and so it's a win-win situation for both the platforms and the worker to adhere to some of these principles, because then if you have a happier workforce, you have better communication, you actually have a more productive operational environment, and in the long term you actually save costs and you make more profit as well as a platform owner. And so I think it's a win-win situation. It's a tide that rises rather than being seen. So I hope that answers your one question there.
Definitely, adds to the dialogue and discussion. It kind of actually neatly fits into the next question coming from an audience. Pitso, I know you're trying to answer the question. Maybe you might like to answer in public. I might read out the question. So here's a question from Robin Chetty. Some of the positive outcomes for gig workers has come as the result of collaborating with organizations like Fairwork. So why are the larger international platforms seemingly unwilling to collaborate? This kind of slightly poses a question back to what JP just answered, but I also actually want other authors and probably Ines to respond. Could anyone, and I know Pitso is trying to respond. Pitso, could you just get going?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, it's not been our experience that the platforms do not want to collaborate. Some of them, let's say the majority of them are, but I think as Robin Lee observes, I mean, there is a little bit of unwillingness in some of the bigger partners to collaborate. And I think for us, our role is that we want to work with them. So we don't want to push them back or slate them for not cooperating with us. But yes, it's true, some of them don't. And we know that the companies that have taken on the spirit of fair work and have started working with us, they themselves attest to the fact that things are becoming better. They are getting advice from a large reservoir of knowledge. As we said, over 30 countries are doing this, and we are able to bring all of those best practices to work with them. So those companies that do not seem willing, we are patient with them. We always ask them every year. We send them requests. We ask for meetings with them, and we've seen there's been a huge media coverage about many particular platforms that are multinational that are having problems, right? So, and I believe it's up to us to keep appealing to them to come to the table so that we can work with them, so that ultimately the work that they are doing, which is offering people job opportunities where there's so much scarcity, that work can continue. So we hope that more and more organizations, as we reach out to them, will be willing and happy to work with us.
JP, please.
I want to congratulate Robin for making that astute remark, and Ines is going to respond as well. But I think it is definitely, and it's almost unique to South Africa, that our domestic platforms, but we found it in South America as well, are more responsive and more socially minded about the lot of their workers than the international platforms. So that is a very good studio observation that we found. And I think a nice thing is that the Fairwork project is actually, by going globally, we've transcended these borders, and now with Uber, for instance, to give one case, Uber now being represented in so many countries, but all of the Fairwork groupings around the world also addressing Uber issues, and rating Uber. So we now find actually at the international level, the central Fairwork team, and I think Murali can contribute to that one, is actually now transcending the borders, and now Fairwork Global is actually negotiating and talking to Uber. And I think so more and more as the Fairwork project globally takes strength and visibility, we're getting to be an international negotiation or a driver for action as well. And to me, that is a positive sign for what's happened at the Fairwork project. I've got other comments, but I think I'll let Ines respond as well.
Ines, I'll just add one small sub-question to that question that's been asked to you. If Robin's question is, if that's true, that larger international platforms are seemingly unwilling to collaborate, how much of it's actually is because of taking advantage of a national level historical lack of regulation, and how much of it is actually on the actions of their own? Do you know what I mean? So sometimes they want to take advantage of the national scenarios that might actually work in favor of their own management strategy. Do you see any such, not synergy, but negative aspect of synergy there? You're muted.
Oh, sorry, Murali, I thought the question was for JP. So I'm not sure if it addresses your question, or if I can address it in a different way. What I wanted to say is it makes sense from how we are as human beings, right? At national level, we are aware of the social context around us. We can see what it does to individuals or how individuals live. But the further removed one is geographically, the less that is in people's conscience, and it's just in human nature that what we don't see, or what we don't really understand, we don't care about as much. And so you would probably find a correlation in the further removed from the kind of circumstances one finds in a particular context one is, the less there would be an understanding and an awareness that it really matters, or how much it matters.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it is, I can just only add. And Sharon, do you have anything to add before I say something? I think she's not there. Okay. I think it's fair to say, if you look at global reports of various Fairwork countries report, it is not that there is no one particular pattern that emerges. There's lots of there are several international platforms that are willing to engage with Fairwork project. At the same time, there are several national level platforms who have been slightly naughty. So it's not that one size fits for all. So I think it's very important. Maybe it's the South African report in one particular year might actually point out to some kind of trend, but I don't think we should actually generalize that at the global level. So we have different levels of engagement regarding with both international and national level partners. I have another one question to all participants, if that's okay. I think we also have to wrap up. You know, I also strongly encourage participants to ask your Q&A. There is an opportunity to write your questions here. So please do feel free to write your questions, and then panelists are here to respond to your question. This question is that more about, do you think that the South African platform overall performances, because South African Fairwork report is one of the legacy Fairwork partner. This is the 4th year, and it's been happening for right from the beginning, year 0. And so based on this, Is there anything that you think, as four of you involved in the Fairwork South Africa project, that where do you see the trend is actually proceeding? And it's kind of actually, it's also made you respond to, it's not international or national platform, but sometimes the issues actually are more important than just one platform. So is it actually certain issues are more delicate to deal with than others? And what's the overall observation or experience and trends in the South Africa reports, looking back at the four years? So who wants to go first? I will pick one.
Okay, I think maybe I should tell you, because I've been sort of deeply involved in the four trends there. We've had up and down. So we've actually been plotting how platforms are scoring over time and by principle. And obviously we had the principles changing. I think it's very hard to tell, because we had not only COVID-19, which threw an enormous economic spanner in the works, but then now we've had the Ukraine war, and you know, there will keep being these disturbances in the economy, and some will accelerate the platform economy in different ways, like e-hailing and e-services, home-based services were tremendously affected and squeezed. The profit margins there, workers suffered, especially people at the bottom of the market. The Ukraine war is actually gave rise to this very tight vice grip, double whammy of reducing income and rising costs. So this is impossible to foresee. Platforms react dynamically to these situations, like we've seen consolidations in platforms sometimes. We've seen it take over, you know, our last year's top-rated platform, getTOD, was taken over this year. We see consolidations like Didi gets out of the country, so Try to Enter is moving back again, so that consolidates the power of certain platforms. With consolidated power sometimes comes the trend of actually trying to squeeze again the workers' contribution or exert that power. You know, it's very hard if you've got power not to abuse it. So I think it's quite hard to tell in terms of dynamic and economic conditions and unforeseeable circumstances. But in terms of the moral compass, I think we're seeing a positive evolution in South Africa. I see platforms becoming concerned, platforms becoming enlightened. Like we said, in South Africa specifically, I don't speak for the rest of the world, but in South Africa, platform owners are becoming enlightened in terms of social responsibilities. They realize we're all into this in the country, nation building together. And so we need to pull together. And I think they're realizing that, you know, let's lift up rising tide, as I want to repeat it previously. So that's my personal view. We've gone through ups and downs. The other e-delivery service and cloud work that has been greatly expanded during COVID. So whatever happens, it affects different platforms differently. And it's quite hard to see sometimes how new technologies and new ideas and new innovations. South Africa's always been a great incubator for new ideas. So I'm hopeful that we're actually going to see maybe the national government getting on board as well and actually promoting this innovation in the country, and hopefully along with that social responsibility and social consciousness of enacting fairer conditions. We've tried the legal route. It's a very slow process. At the moment, we're thinking that activating corporate and social pressure from communities is going to be the easiest way forward if you want to have a sort of a counterbalance.
Ines, so how do you react to that? You know, I mean, the reaching out to regulation and its mechanism is one thing, but also, like JP said, you know, we really have to actually appeal to the best behavior practices as well, and dignity and so on. So how, looking at the trend, what's the best, you know, who is the best player to kind of actually engage with that? And then do you have any thoughts on that?
That is a tricky question. So when you say who's the best player to engage in that,
how do we motivate these platform managers? How do we motivate them? I mean, JP, for example, he made a point about some of these principles, fair principles, are not even cost effective, but yet they are not coming forward to implement them. So what's the best way? You talked about dignity, sustainable livelihoods in non-economic terms. So how do we actually motivate and inspire them to kind of listen to this sort of a non-cost, you know, related even actions that can ensure workers' living conditions?
Yeah, I really like the Fair Work approach for that, where it is not, we're using a stick and we're looking at legislation, but rather to say we're just putting it out there, what the picture looks like, and then getting people to buy in, or platforms to buy in, who want to do better. And so we've taken a similar approach. We're looking at living wages in South Africa at the moment. We're taking a similar approach in the Living Wage South Africa network, where we're saying one can't, or it is less likely to lead to success if people are forced into doing things through legislation, for example. There's a role for legislation, but if an organization is forced into doing something, they do it because they're forced into it, not because they believe into it. And we have often seen cases where then loopholes are being found and ways around going around it are being found. So what one really would like to get is buy-in into it. And so what is just taking off, because living wages are a very not well-known topic in South Africa, but have become much more prominent over the last 4 years, and especially since the pandemic, where we find organizations, not just small ones, but large national organizations and international anyway, who are promoting more fair work conditions and higher wages, and that through that, other organizations might then buy into it because they can see that there's actually the business case, that it leads to greater returns when one treats people fairly, even if initially, or not initially, long-term, the wage expense increases. The return one receives seems to be greater in many cases than the investment, that extra investment that is being made. So we need that data to come forward, I think, to convince people, because we also know if we have a strong belief about how something should be and what is important, it's very difficult to change that. So one really has to work with how do people get influenced? How do individuals make decisions? What are we like as human beings to use those mechanisms in order to convince people? And I think the Fair Work report really gives an excellent example, because it shows collaboration between the different players, from worker to the platform hosts, as well as transparency and getting input on the results. And like Jean-Paul, I think, said it, it's not about, or Pitso, maybe it was you putting someone in the corner, but it really is about, let's collaborate and let's see how we can make this work and how can we learn from each other. And so there are methods that are there, but it isn't about prescribing. It's about bringing things into the open, working with consumers, for example, through the Fair Work report, and consumers wanting to support good labor practices, then maybe making choices about which platforms they use. And in that way, there's some pressure added on the platform.
Thank
so it's a multitude of things, but I think important is mainly, it's not going to work to enforce it.
Right.
Through legislation, for example.
Thank you, Ines. Sharon, I'm just going to drag you because you've been quiet. So if I may do so. So, just following on what Ines said, how much do you think that engaging with platform managers have been fruitful? And you've been involved in more than a few US reports of South Africa. And what has been your experience in terms of, kind of a constructive engagement? For example, getTOD has been relatively positive. So where do you see the trends are actually progressing or regressing?
Murali, if I can just jump in there. Yeah, so I was just about to answer that question. So it's a bit of both, and I don't think we should be too optimistic and paint a rosy picture that things are changing and they're changing at the rate that we want them to. Things and in some ways are not changing, and you can see it being reflected in the scores. I mean, where some platforms obtain absolutely zero, right? So that means they're not coming to the party at all. However, there is cause to be optimistic, because if we look in the previous years, if one was to just look at the reports that we've had up until this year, we do document continuously how platforms are changing. And I think this will also answer the question, I think it was from Given or from Iman as well, about, does this type of pressure, yield any positive things? If you look into the report, we have a section in all the previous reports where we document how platforms have actually reacted to this intervention through this report, where we've worked with them and they have changed some of the practices. So, and some of those practices that have been changed, they are reflected in the scores that those particular platforms are obtaining as we go. So there is reason to be optimistic, but also at the same time, we have to be cautious. We need to do something, and the change will not happen by itself. We have to put pressure on policymakers. We have to put pressure on the platforms. We have to keep, as consumers ourselves, we have to change our behavior and start using our buying power as consumers to reflect the change that we want to see.
Thank you. Sharon, do you have any comments? Unless we can go for the final rounds. Do you have anything to add, please?
Thank you, Murali. Nothing from my side, so happy for you to go ahead. Okay.
No, but again, coming back to all of you, if there is no other question, because there's one more question I think from the participant, but I'm going to turn the question into a final question. If there is no other question from participants, which I don't see any, I might actually ask one final closing comments from everybody. So what I'm seeing is that the Fairwork's approach, it's not strictly going after legislators to impose rules and laws, but sort of putting pressure on all sides to kind of bring about a constructive engagement to see some sort of a change in workers' living conditions. That's how I see it. But based on your experience, the closing remark, what kind of pressure do you think that can bring about changes more effectively and quickly? I mean, where do you think the pressure should be in South Africa, for at least? Should we be putting more pressure in platforms or on consumers of activism, or labor union movements, or regulators? So where do you think that the pressure point should be moving towards? And any other your final concluding mark? So I'll start with Sharon, because you haven't spoken in a while. So I'll start with Sharon, please.
Thank you. So just from my perspective, I'm not so much in favor of pressure, perhaps, but I think I'm a big fan of collaboration. So I think that that's where the future lies, that in some way we build some collaborative, strengthen it. I mean, it's been done now through the pledge, and it's part of Fair Work anyway, as part of the way the work is done. But I think that really can lead to positive change. As Ines was saying, getting the buy-in from people, getting people working together, to me, that's the way forward and the way to make change.
Thank you. Pitso, please, your final words, final thoughts.
All right. Okay. So, just as closing remarks for me, I would like to end with an appeal to say we have the considerable power, right, as individuals and also as organizations that are involved in the space. And I think that the changes will not happen by themselves, as I said, but the changes will happen through strong collaboration, a concerted effort to demand change. And we are seeing this happening in all fronts. We're seeing workers, particularly in the transportation sector, taking their power back to platforms. Some of them are going to courts to demand certain rights to be guaranteed. And we've seen all of us in society where a lot of the gig workers take on the streets through protests and then demanding, better, better relationships with the platforms. Of course, we don't want, disruption for disruption's sake. However, sometimes, when we raise our voices in this way, sometimes, that's what gets through. So we want to use all available mechanisms, particularly, through this framework, to help play our part as well and put pressure for meaningful change.
Thank you, Pitso. So exhausting all mechanisms available to improve workers' conditions is the key. Thank you. JP, your final thoughts, please.
Okay, I think it's important to thank you for that. Just like Pitso says, there's lots of forces at play. And so even if Fairwork didn't exist, there would still be strikes. There will still be eventually legislation enforced, and some of it will be favorable to platforms, some of it will maybe more favorable for labor. So we're just one of the many forces there. And I don't think we're going to be able to execute and subscribe to push forward for legislation change and so on. So I think at the moment we pushing for pledges from public organization, which raises the visibility and the consciousness level of the consumer of the services. We then hopefully will vote with a wallet. So, that is the one thing. So raising a sensibility and sensitivity amongst the purchaser, the buyer, the consumer. And the second thing I think is that we may want to engage more in is actually a more open dialogue and communication platform directly with the platform owners, and then hopefully putting the workers and the platform owners into contact with each other. So I think that keeping dialogue or promoting that, to me, is also a very important leg for Fairwork project to go forward.
Thank you so much, JP. So keeping all communication channels open and facilitating those channels.
Or even a platform for communication and dialogue. So creating a space where workers and platform owners can talk to each other.
Great. And I come to Ines last because there's a reason for that. Because you're actually not only involved with the Fairwork Council, but also you're largely involved in the South African labor movement itself. So how do you see the whole trend, and within which how this particular sector is actually going to be? Your final thoughts.
Yes. Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Okay, wow, sure. That was a big entry to the final words from me. So I wouldn't say that I'm involved with the labor movement, but I'm not a member of Fairwork, but I really appreciate the work that Fairwork does. And I think what is very strong about the work Fairwork does and the report, there are many strengths, but the biggest ones are that it is based on a few number of indicators, 5 indicators, and a simple rating system, which is easily understood, and it provides many purposes in that it allows platforms, if they so wish, to look at how they fare in relation to the indicators, but also how they fare in relation to others. And then I've already spoken to the consumer, using it as a tool for consumers to take action in deciding who they would like to support and who maybe not. And so what I would like is for the Fairwork project to really take that forward, to not complicate things more, but there's real strength in the approach, the collaborative approach, and the simple but effective way of providing a rating.
Thank you so much for that. That was a very good summing up. It's pretty much kind of reflects all previous speakers' final comments in some ways. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So with that, I would like to say congratulations to Fairwork South Africa colleagues. And it's an amazingly put together, and I've been a witness, not for the whole time, but even shortly. So thank you so much. And I'd also like to say thank you to Pablo, who's been fantastic in organizing the whole Zoom meeting without a glitch. Thank you, Pablo. And thank you to everybody who've been with us until now. And the report is available on Fairwork website. So please go have a read the report. And if you know any companies that is actually might be interested in offering pledge, or if you represent any corporations who is interested in showing some pledge, do email Pitso or one of the authors here or one of us. So we look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to working with you. As everyone said, constructive engagement, keeping all communication channels open, be there for collaboration is a way forward to improve workers' conditions. And with that, we end this session. Thank you so much.